The chandelier-lit dining room fell silent as Martha's sharp palm connected with Tom's cheek. "How dare you put your filthy hands on me?" she hissed, smoothing her Valentino dress. Tom reeled, the sting less impactful than the immediate public shame. His wife Sarah watched him, her expression colder than the ice in her water glass. "Apologize to my mother now," she stated, "or simply leave." The sharp crack of Martha's hand across Tom's cheek echoed in the suddenly silent dining room. Crystal glasses paused mid-lift. Silverware clinked softly against china. Martha, her face a blotchy red, pulled her hand back as if burned. "How dare you put your filthy hands on me?" she spat, her gaze dropping to the sleeve of her crimson Valentino dress. "Look what you've done to my silk." Tom stood frozen, more stung by the public spectacle than by the physical impact. He had only reached across the table for the salt, his elbow brushing her arm, a momentary contact. He could still feel the expensive fabric against his skin. His hand went instinctively to his cheek, not rubbing the faint redness, but merely touching the spot where the force had landed. The air in the chandelier-lit room felt thick, heavy with unspoken judgment. His eyes found Sarah, his wife of 5 years, seated directly across from him. He expected some flicker of indignation, a shared glance of disbelief. Instead, her face was smooth, almost unreadable, like a polished stone. Her gaze was not one of support, but a cool, measured assessment. Her posture remained straight, her hands resting neatly beside her half-eaten fillet. "Tom," Sarah said, her voice even, carrying easily across the table. "Apologize to my mother now, or leave." The words hung there, precise and unyielding. The silence returned, deeper this time. It was not a request, but a directive, delivered without a hint of warmth or wavering. In that instant, something inside Tom shifted, a quiet, almost imperceptible snap. A tether woven over years of careful diplomacy and strained smiles, finally frayed and broke. The desire to belong to this world, to bridge the chasm between his upbringing and theirs, simply evaporated. He looked down at his own plate, the filet mignon barely touched, a side of roasted asparagus already cooling. He picked up his linen napkin, folded it with an unnatural meticulousness, and placed it to the left of his plate. The small gesture felt deliberate, a silent closure. Without another word, without looking at Martha's still furious face or Sarah's impassive one, he stood up from the mahogany table. The scrape of his chair was the only sound as he walked out of the room, past the stunned faces of Martha's bridge club friends, and out into the cool evening. The air outside was thick with the smell of wet pavement. Rain hammered the roof of his BMW as he pulled away from the expansive colonial house. The wipers worked overtime, blurring the street lights into streaks of yellow. Martha's voice, sharp with disdain, replayed in his head. "Riverside," she'd once sneered. "That's hardly Brookfield Academy, is it? Or a state school degree from Westlake, Tom." How quaint. He'd absorbed it all, letting the words slide, focusing on his successful consulting practice, the comfortable life he had built for them, the steady, reliable man he considered himself to be. 5 years he had spent trying to prove himself, navigating the unspoken rules of this affluent suburb, enduring Martha's constant, casual contempt. He remembered the long hours, the deals closed, the quiet satisfaction of building something from nothing. It all seemed insignificant against the backdrop of her Valentino dress and Sarah's cool ultimatum. "Apologize to my mother now or leave." The words echoed, clear as a bell, solidifying her choice, laying bare the truth of where he stood in her estimation. He had always been the outsider, a project, a convenient husband. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, vibrating against the leather. It was Sarah. He let it buzz, then pressed the silence button, silencing her with a definitive click. He picked up his own phone, the screen dimly lit by the passing streetlights. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Mike Peterson's name. Mike, an old college friend, now a sharp attorney who knew the underside of things. He pressed call. The phone rang twice before Mike answered, his voice a little rough. "Mike, it's Tom," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I need your help. Martha Callahan." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then Mike's familiar chuckle, low and knowing. Finally taking the gloves off, huh? He said. Give me 48 hours. A strange, unfamiliar calm settled over Tom as he drove. The rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof the only sound. The bending, the compromising, the striving to fit in. It stopped tonight. The low hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the house when Tom let himself in. The modernist living room, with its clean lines and minimalist furniture, felt colder than usual. Sarah stood by the expansive glass doors that overlooked the impeccably manicured backyard, her arms crossed tight across her chest. The overhead recessed lights highlighted the sharp angles of her shoulders, casting shadows beneath her cheekbones. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the quiet. The question itself, the tone, the slight lift of her chin, it was Martha, an echo that had, until now, been easy to ignore. Tom took his time, hanging his rain-dampened coat on the hall tree. The movement was deliberate, each button and hook engaged with a quiet precision. "Driving," he replied, his voice calm, giving nothing away. He walked past her, heading towards the kitchen, the soft thud of his shoes on the polished concrete floor, the only indication of his presence. She followed him, her steps sharper, faster. "Driving?" Her voice rose slightly. "You just walked out. You embarrassed my entire family tonight, Tom." Mother is absolutely furious. He turned, leaning against the cold granite countertop. For the first time, he truly looked at Sarah, not just at her familiar features, but at the way her blonde hair, styled just like Martha's, fell perfectly around her shoulders. Her posture, rigid and self-assured, her tone imperious, demanding. It was Martha, not an echo anymore, but a reflection. "Your mother slapped me," he said quietly, his gaze steady on hers. He watched for a reaction, a flicker of understanding, but found none. "In front of everyone, and you took her side." Sarah waved a dismissive hand, a gesture he'd seen Martha employ countless times. "Oh, honestly, Tom, you should have been more careful. You know how she is about her personal space. That Valentino dress was brand new." He pushed off the counter, taking a step closer. The air between them thickened. "And you know how I am about being publicly humiliated," he countered, his voice still low, but with an edge he hadn't known he possessed. "I am your husband, Sarah, not some house guest, not some hired help." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "Tell me, Sarah," he continued, "if I had slapped your mother, if I had struck Martha in front of her bridge club, would you have told her to apologize to me?" Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her gaze darted away, searching for an answer in the stainless steel appliances, the minimalist decor. The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable, before settling like a heavy blanket. It was all the answer he needed. "Don't walk away from me," Sarah snapped, her voice tightening with an anger that felt almost theatrical. It was the imperious tone of Martha, honed over decades. "We need to fix this, Tom. This is not how we handle things." "Fix what exactly?" Tom retorted, a quiet weariness entering his voice. He spread his hands in a small, encompassing gesture. "Your mother's behavior, your loyalty issues, our marriage." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "It was just a misunderstanding, Tom. You blew it out of proportion." He laughed then, a short, hollow sound devoid of humor. It was a laugh that surprised even him. "No, Sarah," he said, shaking his head slowly. "A misunderstanding is ordering the wrong coffee at a diner." Tonight was a revelation. Her composure, brittle as it was, finally cracked. "What does that mean?" she demanded, her voice sharp with a sudden fear. Tom looked at her, truly looked, and saw a stranger standing in his kitchen. The woman he had married, the woman he had loved, had vanished, replaced by a carbon copy of her mother. "It means," he said, his voice flat, "I finally see where I stand in this marriage." She rolled her eyes then, a subtle, dismissive gesture that was pure Martha. It was the same gesture she used when he talked about his latest consulting project, or when he suggested a weekend trip that wasn't to her parents' lake house. It chilled him. "Am I overreacting?" Tom challenged, his voice quiet. "Honestly, Sarah, if you had to choose between me and your mother, who would you pick?" Her gaze dropped to the floor, her hands, which had been resting on the countertop, clenched into fists. She didn't speak. She just stood there, eyes fixed on the grout lines of the tiles, and hesitated. It was a long hesitation, filled with unsaid things, and it told him everything he needed to know. 2 days later, the calm Tom had felt in his car had solidified into a quiet resolve. His phone buzzed. It was Mike. "You're going to want to see this," Mike's voice crackled through the speaker, a hint of something unrevealed in his tone. Tom drove downtown through the midday traffic to Mike's office. It was a renovated warehouse space in the Arts District, all exposed brick and gleaming industrial design. From the large windows, the river gleamed under a pale Midwestern sky. Mike, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, gestured towards a leather armchair opposite his desk. "Coffee?" Mike asked, settling back into his own ergonomic chair. "Just the findings," Tom replied, his voice clipped. Mike nodded, a knowing smile playing on his lips. He reached across his expansive desk, picking up a thick manila folder. The folder seemed to hold a weight disproportionate to its size. He placed it squarely between them. "What did you find?" Tom asked again, a little softer this time, as he leaned forward. "Martha Callahan isn't quite the paragon of virtue she pretends to be," Mike stated, his eyes steady on Tom's. He pushed the folder across the polished concrete desktop. Tom opened it, his breath catching slightly. Inside were dozens of documents, meticulously organized. Bank statements, hotel receipts, and a series of photographs. He pulled out the first few pages. Large transfers of money, flagged in yellow, went to an account registered under the name D. Clark. Interspersed were receipts from the Bellevue Hotel, a discreet, upscale establishment on the edge of the city. Then came the photographs. Martha. Not in her usual severe, tailored suits, but in softer clothes, her arm linked with a distinguished-looking man. He was tall, with silver hair and an easy smile. Definitely not Robert Callahan, her husband. There were pictures of them entering the Bellevue, leaving fashionable restaurants, laughing together over coffee on a sun-dappled patio. The images were clear, undeniable. He flipped further past more receipts and bank records to a section detailing the Callahan Foundation. This was Martha's cherished charity, the one she championed at every society gala, the one she constantly spoke about at dinner parties. Here, the transfers were subtler, smaller, but regular. A pattern emerged, a slow, steady bleed. "She's been having an affair for 3 years," Mike began, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping. "With David Clark. He's a board member at First Capital Bank. A solid old money family, by all accounts." Tom looked up, the weight of the folder heavy in his hands. He felt a strange, cold calm settling over him. It wasn't anger, not yet, just a clear, clinical understanding. "And she's been stealing," Mike continued, "from her own charity, no less, to fund their little rendezvous. Hotel suites, gifts, lavish dinners, that sort of thing. All routed through personal accounts, then transferred to Clark, or paid directly." "How much has she taken?" Tom asked, his voice flat. Mike consulted a sheet in front of him. "Nearly $400,000 over the past 5 years. Classic embezzlement pattern, really. Small amounts at first, then escalating as she got bolder." "Does Robert know?" Tom asked, thinking of Martha's stoic husband, a man who seemed entirely consumed by his corporate empire. Mike shook his head. "No one knows. She's been very careful. Clark's married, too, to Brenda Johnson's sister, actually, so he's got just as much to lose. They've both been meticulous about keeping it quiet." "Until now," Tom murmured, closing the folder with a soft thud. He tucked it firmly under his arm, the weight of it feeling significant, almost sacred. Mike studied him, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, "what are you going to do with this, Tom?" Tom stood up, the folder still clasped tightly. He met Mike's gaze, his own eyes holding a newfound resolve. "I'm going to give Martha exactly what she deserves," he answered, his voice devoid of emotion. "The truth." Tom arranged the dinner for the very next evening. He called Sarah, his voice calm, apologetic. "I think we should have your parents over," he suggested, "to make amends. What happened the other night? It was uncalled for. I want to smooth things over." Sarah was quiet for a moment on the phone, a palpable suspicion in her silence. He could almost hear her calculating the angles, weighing the benefits. Finally she agreed, her tone still wary, but laced with a hint of relief. She wanted things fixed. He knew, even if the fixing only meant returning to the superficial peace they had always maintained. She wanted her parents to think well of their marriage, to think well of her. Martha arrived first, precisely at 7. She swept through the front door, a cloud of expensive French perfume preceding her. Her designer dress, a soft cream silk, rustled as she moved. Her eyes barely met Tom's as she offered a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Sarah," she said, embracing her daughter with a practiced ease. "Darling, you look well." Her gaze lingered on the modernist living room, assessing, judging, as always. Robert followed a moment later, looking tired and drawn. The usual sharp glint in his eyes seemed dimmed, replaced by a weary resignation. He offered Tom a handshake, brief and firm, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The weight of his family's reputation, of his wife's social standing, seemed etched into the lines around his mouth. They sat at the dining table, the same table where just days ago Tom had been publicly humiliated. The crystal glasses gleamed under the soft glow of the chandelier. Martha took her seat at the head, radiating her usual air of superiority. "I appreciate you reaching out to smooth things over, Tom," Martha said, her voice dripping with a forced graciousness that made his skin crawl. She took a sip of her Chardonnay. "It shows maturity." Tom met her gaze across the table, a thin smile playing on his lips. "I've had some revelations recently," he said, his voice even, "about what truly matters. Family, truth, loyalty." He watched Martha's expression, but it remained impassive. Sarah, seated beside him, shifted in her seat. He felt her foot brush his under the table. A sharp, warning glance shot his way. He ignored it, his gaze still fixed on Martha. Dinner unfolded with the usual superficial conversation. Martha recounted tales from her latest charity gala. Robert offered brief, clipped responses about his golf game. Sarah discussed her latest interior design project, carefully avoiding anything that might lead to a genuine conversation. Tom participated minimally, offering polite affirmations, his mind elsewhere. He felt a profound detachment, as if observing a play in which he was merely a bit player. As Sarah began to clear the plates, stacking them with quiet efficiency, Tom calmly reached down beside his chair. His fingers closed around the familiar manila folder he had strategically placed there. He brought it up, resting it on his lap for a moment, the weight reassuring. "Martha," he said, his voice cutting through the clink of silverware, steady and clear. He placed the folder on the polished dining table, pushing it slightly forward. "There's something I'd like to show you." Martha's hand, halfway to taking her plate, paused. Her eyes, usually so sharp and dismissive, narrowed just a fraction. "What is it?" she asked, a subtle hardening in her tone. Tom didn't answer directly. Instead, he simply slid the folder across the smooth, gleaming surface of the mahogany. It stopped just in front of her. "Something," he stated, his gaze unflinching. "I think Robert will find very interesting." Martha's posture stiffened. Her eyes widened, almost imperceptibly, as she glanced from Tom to the unassuming manila folder. The air in the room grew suddenly heavy, thick with an unspoken tension. Robert, who had been watching the exchange with a bewildered expression, reached for the folder. "What's this about, Tom?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion. Robert's fingers, surprisingly steady, untied the string of the manila folder. As he pulled back the flap, Martha's blood visibly drained from her face, leaving it a stark, mottled white. Her eyes, wide and fixed on the folder, were no longer dismissive, but filled with a raw, dawning terror. He began to flip through the pages. The first few were photographs. Martha laughing, her arm linked with David Clark, outside the Bellevue. Then more pictures, candid and undeniable. His brow furrowed. He moved to the bank statements, the highlighted transfers. His confusion deepened into a grim disbelief, and then a terrible, dawning comprehension began to spread across his features. The color drained from his face, mirroring Martha's. "Robert, don't," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible, a desperate plea that seemed to choke in her throat. Her hand reached out, hovering in the air between them, as if to snatch the folder away. Robert ignored her. His gaze, once confused, was now locked, unblinking, on the incriminating documents. He turned a page, then another, his breathing growing shallow. Sarah, bewildered by the sudden shift in atmosphere, watched her father's face. She saw the shock register, then the hurt, Then something else, something colder. She leaned forward, craning her neck to see what held her father so captive. Her eyes landed on a photograph of her mother, smiling intimately with a man who was decidedly not her husband. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, loud in the suddenly silent room. Robert slowly looked up, his eyes now fixed on Martha. The quiet storm that had been brewing within them finally broke. "Martha," he said, his voice low, measured, and dangerously calm. "Is this true?" Martha scrambled, her composure shattering like fragile glass. Her meticulously constructed facade crumbled. "Of course not!" she cried, her voice high and shrill. She gestured wildly at Tom. "It's a fabrication. He's trying to ruin us. He's trying to destroy everything." Tom remained seated, watching her unravel. "It's all meticulously documented, Martha," he interjected calmly, his voice a steady counterpoint to her hysteria. 3 years, nearly 400,000 from your own foundation. David Clark, the Bellevue Hotel. Robert flinched at the mention of the foundation. His voice, though still quiet, carried an undeniable fury. "The foundation?" he repeated, his eyes burning into Martha's. "My mother's legacy? You stole from my mother's charity?" Martha dissolved into tears. Not the elegant, controlled tears of social events, but raw, messy sobs. She reached for Robert, clutching his arm, begging him to believe her, to see that Tom was lying, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Robert pulled his arm away with a jerk, as if her touch had burned him. His face was etched with a profound devastation. The years of lies, the calculated deceptions, were too evident in the pages spread before him. There was no denying the meticulous records. Sarah, still reeling from the shock of the photographs and the bank statements, found her voice. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and betrayal. "Mother," she whispered, the word hollow. "Is this true? You've been having an affair?" Tom watched the scene unfold, a grim satisfaction coexisting with a profound weariness. The quiet judgment he had felt for so long now had a face, and it was Martha's, stripped bare of all pretension. Robert slowly rose from the table, the thick manila folder still clutched in his hand, as if it contained not just papers, but his shattered world. He looked at Martha, her face streaked with tears, her lies laid bare. "I don't believe you," Robert said to Martha, his voice broken and hollow, stripped of all authority. "I don't believe any of it. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold." Martha tried desperately to recover, her mind scrambling for a new lie, a plausible denial that could mend the chasm that had just opened. "Robert, darling, you can't believe him," she stammered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He's always hated me. He's always been jealous of us, of our life." But the words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The meticulously documented evidence spread across the table was a silent, damning testament to her betrayal. Robert's trust, built over decades, was shattered beyond repair. Without another word, Robert slowly pushed his chair back from the table. The scrape of the wood echoed in the sudden silence. He stood, his shoulders slumped, the thick folder clutched in his hand as if it were the only thing holding him upright. He turned, his eyes glazed over, and walked out of the dining room. His steps were heavy, measured, disappearing down the hallway. Robert, wait," Martha wailed, a primal sound of distress. She scrambled out of her chair, knocking it over in her haste, and chased after him, her desperate cries echoing through the pristine house. Sarah, her face contorted with a mixture of fury and betrayal, spun on Tom. Her eyes, usually so composed, blazed with an uncontrolled anger. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You've destroyed everything." Tom met her gaze, his own unwavering. The calm he had felt earlier had settled deep within him, a quiet, unshakable core. "I told you I'd show you where you stood in this marriage, Sarah," he said, his voice level, devoid of triumph or regret. "And I delivered the truth." "This isn't truth. This is revenge," Sarah screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "You ruined my family." "Your mother ruined your family years ago, Sarah," Tom countered, his voice cold, distant. "I just shone a light on it. You just preferred to keep the lights off." Sarah backed away from him, visibly shaken. The weight of her mother's actions and her own complicity in allowing them to fester seemed to press down on her. She couldn't meet his eyes, her gaze falling to the polished floor, seeing only the shattered pieces of her perfect world. From outside, the distant rumble of Robert's car engine starting cut through the sudden quiet. The sound grew then faded, taking with it the last vestiges of the man who had been the foundation of Martha's life. Then, from another part of the house, Martha's pained sobs drifted, a desolate, broken sound. Tom stood amidst the wreckage of the dinner table, the half-eaten food, the overturned chair. He felt a hollow victory, a quiet, grim satisfaction that Martha finally had paid a price. But it was a costly victory. He knew his marriage to Sarah was irrevocably over, the truth too heavy, too painful for their fragile bond to bear. The years of carefully constructed appearances, of polite fictions, had come crashing down in one swift, brutal strike. He reflected on the devastating cost of loyalty, not just to a spouse, but to a family built on lies. The sharp, bitter price of honesty, delivered without apology. He thought about the solitary path now laid before him, a path free of pretense, free of judgment, but also profoundly alone. Sure, ours all known. He turned and walked out of the house. This exit was not quiet, not tentative. It was deliberate, resolute. He stepped out into the cool, silent Midwestern night, leaving the shattered remnants of a family and a marriage behind him. The sound of Robert's car, fading into the silent Midwestern night, marked the end. Martha's sobs, now distant and muffled, were the last echoes of a life meticulously crafted and brutally exposed. For Tom, standing in the ruined dining room, the victory felt hollow, tinged with an unexpected weariness. He had sought truth, and he had found it, but the cost was absolute. His marriage to Sarah, already a fragile construct of expectations and appearances, was undeniably over. The weight of Martha's betrayal, coupled with Sarah's unwavering loyalty to her mother, had shattered their bond beyond repair. There would be no fixing this, no going back to the polite fictions they had maintained. The honesty, raw and unflinching, had burned away any possibility of reconciliation. He looked at the empty chairs, the half-eaten food, the subtle gleam of the silver. It was a tableau of a life that was no longer his. He had paid a heavy price for loyalty, for dignity, for demanding that truth matter. But as he walked out of the house, not quietly this time, but with a deliberate stride into the cool night, he felt a strange sense of liberation. The bending had stopped. The proving was over. He was finally, simply himself.